Welcome back everyone to the Rotorua Lakes Council. It's a pleasure to be the host for this session of the Mayoral Forum. Before we get underway though, I will just remind everyone that it's being live streamed and welcome those who are joining us online. In the room today we also have our local officer. So we do see him take photos or write notes. But I would just open up for my room, Thank you.
I just lost our power at home before again.
And if you forget to mute, I'm going to come. I'll pull you out. You can shout me a copy later. I do also want to the Peter River from Thames Mayoral. It's great to have you today as well. And for the first time joining the Mayoral Forum, also to new CE of Western Bay VT District Council, to Matt Britton. Welcome to around the table with us. And we do acknowledge that Aileen from Thames Mayoral is also online with us as well. Thank you for joining us. Before we get underway as well, I would just like to start with a little bit of an apology. There was just some slight confusion on whether councillors were to join today. Just quite honestly, due to the nature of there being 8 councillors around the table, if that invite was extended to all councillors, I'm not even sure we'll be able to fit them in our very large chamber room. So I do apologise to any councillors that are joining online, but that was the reason for the online attendance through community councillors. So I would also just like to acknowledge that we have our DIA staff here. We're looking forward to a presentation. And we did send an invite out to the Minister of Local Government, Simon Watts, which he hasn't been able to lock in a date for today. But we have to inform him from the Labour spokesperson, opposition spokesperson for government, Tony who has put in his weeks and unable to attend the meeting. But I will just check if there are any other apologies around the table to note.
The apologies from me, John, for now. I will be sitting in this place. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We appreciate that. So we'll note that apology. I have to move to a seconder. It's seconded by me, Tunui. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. There are no items that need to be put onto the agenda that we've already. So I'll just check the any declarations of conflict of interest. And we'll just move our minutes to start our meeting. That was on the 12th of March 2026. And I have a mover and a seconder for those that's from page 7 of our agenda. That's moved by Benia, seconded by myself. Any corrections for the minutes? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Any against? That's carried. Now we move to page 21 of the agenda. This is the timeline of council's decisions on Head Start pathways. And I'll ask for a mover and a seconder just to receive the report timeline of council's decisions on Head Start pathways subject to the following correction relating to and then that it is voted by me, seconded by my staff. I'll just put that to the vote to receive. All those in favour can say aye. Any against? Thank you. So just by way of brief update, and there is an opportunity if you wish to speak to it to provide any further updates, but this is essentially allowing us all an opportunity to understand when we expect the various councils to make their decision. I do acknowledge that many of us, most of us have started community engagement. It is a really tight time frame. So we're doing the best we can with that. But I do want to acknowledge that for the majority of us, the end of July is when we are seeking to make a decision. On that note as well, I also want to just mention that as well as the community engagement that's been undertaken, many mayors and also Chair Matamoana have been regular weekly updates just by way of video call so that we can keep each other informed. Some of us councils have already had the first debate around the table for whether or not we start the Head Start pathway. But essentially we won't know until we hear back from our community around confirming any potential partnerships moving forward. So just want to make clear that no decisions have been made yet, but we are all in earnest attempting to go through this process as best as possible under the tight time frames. So I will just open up if there are any comments to update, and this is page 21. Right, well, that's pretty straightforward. Yeah, so we will move on to the next agenda item. Thank you. So it's now my pleasure to invite Kevin, Ford, and Rebecca from DIA. Can I acknowledge the significant amount of work and engagement that you have already had underway? I know you've been engaged in a number of different mayors and councils, and there have been many questions that have arisen since the government first made the announcement on the proposal and further information that has been coming out. But I would like to just first of all ask for a group and a second that Claire in your board receives the presentation on simplifying local government executive directive on Head Start pathway. Thank you. That's moved by manufacturers. He is giving us a good DJ rendition. All those in favour to receive, so please say aye. Any against, that's carried. We'll hand over to Amy and Rebecca. Thank you very much for your time today.
Greetings while talking about it's a privilege to be here talking to you all, probably for the second or third time about the Head Start pathway. I do think it's just useful just to recap a couple of things before I go into questions. I know many of you have a good understanding of what the Head Start is now, so I don't intend on explaining in great detail, but I will cover off on a couple of things that come up routinely under questioning as I have been talking to rural forums throughout the country. So I think the first thing to highlight is just the two distinct phases of the local government reform. And so there are two key phases. So the first one is the Head Start and the second one's obviously the backstop. The key kind of point of transition between those two phases is the 2028 local body elections. And so the Head Start, although you're being asked to put forward a proposal on the 9th of August, doesn't finish yet. You know, there is a 6-month period post you submitting proposals where there'll be a lot of detail worked through in the Head Start between councils and central government, working together on things like representation models and how you might do things like debt harmonisation, with the intention of confirming those entities and that legislation being in place before the 2028 local body elections, so that people can vote for the leaders who are going to lead those new entities. And so that's kind of the Head Start. It'll conclude by the 2028 local body elections. The backstop will commence after that. And the backstop is everyone who wasn't in the Head Start progressing through a mandatory renewal process. That process at the moment will look like what was in the draft proposal document that was released in November. So Cabinet at that stage signalled a preferred model of having the Board of Mayors within the region come together and having a 2-year period to plan reorganisation. Cabinet also signalled, though, at the same time that they thought there could be a role for our commissioners to either sit alongside that Board of Mayors with voting powers or potentially just as observers to support. But also they signalled there may be the potential for our commissioners to run the process without the mayors as well. And so There is a little bit of uncertainty about what that backstop approach might look like and who might lead it. But Cabinet will come back in May next year to confirm the design of the backstop. And so I will acknowledge that you are having to make decisions about whether or not you'll be in the head start or in the backstop without having full knowledge of what the backstop might look for you if you are choosing to go that route. So I'll just be clear about it. The other thing I wanted to highlight about the two phases is if you're not going to be in the head start, that doesn't mean you can't still be planning reorganisation. We would encourage you to continue to think about what's best for you and your region, even if you're not in the head start, and to continue to work and not wait until the backstop formally starts. And ministers are going to have to confirm their approach in the backstop in May next year. And that will be influenced by the work that happens between now and May. So even if you are unable to put forward a proposal on the 9th of August, you may have done a lot of work between the 9th of August and May next year. That might be influential in how they think about the backstop. So I would encourage you to, although there are two phases, to think about, still progressing work even if you are in the head start. I have had a number of questions about who can submit a proposal and what a proposal might look like. And so one of the questions that I get asked is, can a single territorial authority become a unitary authority? And the answer is yes, but it needs to be as part of a broader proposal where there is actually amalgamation proposed of two territorial authorities coming together. And that it needs to be in the best interest for the region, for that single territorial authority to become a unitary, and it needs to still be able to work collaboratively with the other players in the region to deliver those things that are best managed regionally. And I will just make an explicit reference to spatial planning at this point. So it is the government's intention for regional spatial planning to still be done regionally, regardless of how you might organise yourself within the region. And for your first spatial plan, you will plan, within the boundaries of what is currently the region at the time that the bills are enacted. That may change, going further afield, and these proposals, if you are changing regional boundaries, may influence how you think about spatial plans in the future, but not for the first spatial plan, as an example. Other functions that the government has signalled is important to think about regionally is catchment management and transport. And we are asking you to put in your proposals how that will work if you have sub-regional unitary authorities that are going to be, what you propose as being a solution for your region. The final thing that I'll just talk to is what needs to be in a proposal and what doesn't. And so we've released guidance. The guidance makes clear that you don't have to resolve everything in the proposal. We know that there is a lot of stuff you need to work through with your neighbours and people you might be putting proposals in with. And so that guidance seeks to give you a sense of that balance of what you need to demonstrate in the proposal and what you consider still need to be resolved. In the proposal, we're really asking for you to say, here is the structure that we propose. We'd like a good sense of that tier one layer of the unitary, how you represent the region, and then what sits beneath that. Often what sits beneath that is how you're going to maintain local voice. And, we know we've got models out there like the Auckland model where you've got local boards. Currently within territorial authorities, you have things like community boards. We want to know what that looks like. It doesn't have to be detailed and say, we have X amount of members here, this is how they're all going to be elected. We want a general sense of how you see that working, just because that's going to give us a good insight into how you see your proposal maintaining things like local voice. And so that's the kind of detail we're looking for. You're showing us your case for change and demonstrating against those criteria how you think it meets that criteria. There is no threshold for that criteria. We are looking at your proposal in the round. You're going to need to trade off some of those criteria and probably weight some more so than others to demonstrate your case for why your model works within your region. A classic example of that is if you're really thinking about maintaining local voice in a very strong way, well, then that might not necessarily allow you to simplify local governance much more than what you currently have. And so just be clear with us when you've made some of those trade-offs. That's not to say that you can't design it well and do those two things at the same time, but at times you might have to trade things off. We will be assessing your proposal in the round. There is no strict threshold for each of those criteria where, a proposal is ruled out because of something that you put in there. So just key for me to highlight that. In terms of things that you don't need to demonstrate now, just to give you a sense of what they might be. I've heard a lot of about debt harmonisation and how the different debt profiles of councils might come together in the unitary authority. We don't need you to provide a detailed plan on how that might work in practice at the outline proposal stage. We just need you to let us know that this is something that we're going to have to work through. It's going to be, something that is going to be hard for us to discuss, but there are some options here that we are considering. And so that's the type of stuff that we can get into in the detailed design phase, but we do want you to signal it in your outline proposal that here are things we haven't been able to resolve yet. So yeah, that's all I wanted to kind of highlight before I open up for any questions. And over to you, Council.
Even very much needing and so we are open for any questions now. Yep, we'll start with me.
Yeah, thank you, Henry, for the presentation. I'll raise the issue around debt that we have raised previously, the disparity in debt levels, and I appreciate that you suggest we raise it as an issue. That makes perfect sense. I think we'd be looking for a little bit more comfort that it is something that will be worked out of, something that will hopefully be worked out if we went down a Head Start proposal. So can you give us any clarification on that? Because you don't have to go through the Head Start and say, well, the solution the IA with this proposal doesn't really work for us, and then we have stuck in the dead end.
Yeah, so the debt harmonisation question will be required through the detailed design phase. Financial sustainability of these new entities is going to be, front of mind as we work through the detail. And so that's why we're asking you at least to highlight it as something that you might not have been able to resolve and what you think the options might be to manage that and what we might look into with the detailed design phase. But it'll be front of mind actually part of the detailed design phase.
Thank you, Major.
Just to follow up on that, I guess what the Head Start gives you is bespoke legislation. So on basically any option is possible, isn't it, around debt harmonisation, for example?
Yeah, I think all options are on the table. We are interested in funding and financing more broadly in your proposal and how we might set these new entities up well to succeed. And there have been different things that have been raised, like rates capping, and we've been asked, will the rates cap apply? That's still under active consideration, that policy. But if you have an approach to rates capping that might work for this new entity, then you can put it forward in the proposal and it'll give us something to consider. That is another thing we will need to work through in the detailed design phase. But yes, new legislation means new tools are on the table that are outside of the Local Government Act currently.
But even the targeted rate would be one way to do it.
That is an option as well.
And just regarding funding, is there an opportunity through these proposals for us to also put forward or advocate for better funding tools from government? So there are already a number that local government have attempted to bring through, such as the market levy or regional distribution of the international visitor levy. So these are existing mechanisms that we still need to have support or approval by government, despite it being strongly supported by councils, industry, community. So at the end of, I suppose, the foundational problem of all of this, even though we haven't had it clearly articulated by the minister, is the funding issue. Local councils just simply haven't funded to deliver all of the core services that our communities wish us to. And even with the rates capping, if roading is also removed, most of us will be within that 2 to 4% rates cap easily. So are there opportunities like that to say, well, okay, if water services are gone, if roading's also gone, we not only will stay within our rates cap, but we also propose these mechanisms for us to be able to collect additional revenue where it makes sense and importantly redistribute it back into the regions that it came from.
Yeah, I mean, the government's got some well-stated positions, some of the things you just raised, tax or tax. But the Head Start proposal gives you an opportunity to highlight some of those ideas, and there's new context government's trying to propose, and so there is another opportunity to put forward those ideas again, and we will give ministers advice about that again.
Chair McDonald and then me Drysdale.
Given one question is around minority representation and under the new Head Start proposal and around the Unitary Council. My understanding is that under simplified local government, that minority representation will disappear per se, and that any provision for minority representation has to be made within a proposal under whatever unitary is structured. Is that correct?
So under the draft proposal, regional councillors were being replaced by the Board of Mayors. And so if you had Māori representation at the regional councillor layer.
It's across the board. I'm talking about TLAs as well, not just a regional council.
Yeah, okay. So for the Head Start proposal, if you are creating a unitary authority, you are going to have to think about things like Māori representation and current models of Māori representation at the TA level and how they might come together. Essentially, you're setting up a new legal entity by setting up a new unitary authority. And there are different options that are available to you when you think about Māori representation. And one is that you redesign the way that wards and elections work, and you might take it to a poll or referendum to determine whether or not you have a Māori ward. There are other options where if you've already got Māori wards in place, you could propose having transitional arrangements that reflect the outcome of a vote that a community might have had to keep a Māori ward. And at the moment, Māori wards are in place for 2 election cycles if there's been a vote, and then they can be under review. And so you could have a transitional approach, or through the legislation, you could have a statutory basis for Māori wards in this new unitary authority. Cabinet will ultimately decide on what the approach might be to Māori representation in these unitary authorities, but we are asking if you have a vision for that type of representation to put it in your proposal, but we also acknowledge that you might not have resolved that, and if that's something that the region hasn't been able to determine, put that in as something that needs to be worked through in that detailed design phase. So the answer to your question is, in short, no, that's not what the government is proposing to remove Māori representation. What we are asking is for the region to tell us how Māori communities can be represented in a new unitary authority if you are putting in the Head Start proposal. So I hope that clarified that.
Yeah, thank you. And that it's the nature of a binding referendum, and then the legalities and quite honestly the confidence of the community that binding referendum will be honoured by the government that put it in is certainly an area of uncertainty. We'll go to Mayor Drysdale and then see Andrew.
Yeah, just had a question again around the Head Start versus the backstop. So I think what I've heard you say is that the Head Start there'll be a lot more flexibility because the backstop will kind of be these are the sort of guardrails, and there'll be some decision making, but it will be within parameters. Is that?
So the backstop will provide less flexibility, like in that the Head Start group will going to have primary legislation, which is going to give them access to new tools. The backstop group probably won't have that, and there's no in-principle decision for them to be creative. So some of those new tools might not be available to backstop council. Also, if you're in the backstop, you're going to be a taker of whatever the Head Start, land within your region. So if you have a sub-region unitary that's created through the Head Start and you're in the backstop, well, that's just an outcome you're going to be faced with as you think about your planning in the backstop. And so that will limit your options again. On the actual design about who gets to make decisions through the backstop and their scope, there's uncertainty about that. And that's why there's those in-principle decisions that they'll revisit in May. And so although it's the Board of Mayors at the moment that might lead that could change. And so, I I'm not sure exactly what the design of the backstop will look like in May next year, but you've got a model in front of you that could be the model. It could change, and so I don't know how much flexibility that might provide.
And then just a follow up to that, which you semi-answered there. If you have a region, for example, and there is an orphan or a group, obviously that limits your options in the backstop. But would you consider basically throwing them into the mix? Because it would make sense, right? If you've got an orphan, that probably in the backstop you just tell them to go with their neighbours.
So we are thinking about stranded districts and how they might be, worked through in the backstop. And if we get a region or sub-regional proposal that has majority of councils and there's a couple that aren't, we will be talking with the Head Start applicants about how do we work with those other two councils through the backstop and, so that they aren't stranded, and what are the transitional arrangements that we might need to put in place in the meantime while they work out what is best for them.
Thank you.
So on that note, does a transitional arrangement while we work out what's best for them, then commissioners, or what are you calling them? Crowd appointed?
No, so I think when I mean transitional arrangements, let's just say we've got a region with 7 councils, 5 of them decide to come together and form a unitary. It might not necessarily be the answer, but it would make sense for that group of 5 to take on the regional council functions, right? And to deliver them on behalf of the region, including to the other 2 that aren't part of that proposal for the 2-year period while they're going through the backstop. And so there'd be some transitional arrangements that might be in place to manage that, to make sure those 2 aren't stranded. But that's something that we need to work through in the proposals. That's just an option. In terms of who might lead the planning for those 2, at this stage, it would be the 2 of the councils working together about what's best for them. But that could change.
Thank you for clarifying that. We've got C.
Just on that Crown appointed person, that they wouldn't have a vote under the new legislation.
So the Crown, so we need to put in primary legislation to enable the backstop. So that will be progressed alongside any Head Start applicant, right? And so there'll be decisions that are made about whether or not we have a Crown Commissioner or the Board of Mayors or both leading the backstop. And voting powers for the Crown Commissioner will be a decision for Cabinet next year.
Under the new legislation, you can't have anyone appointed with
so that's under the Local Government Act. Yeah, I get your point.
And it's very important that the minister does have discretion, and I don't many of us will be seeking it for our ordinary proceedings as well. We've got C. Andrew and the Deputy Chairman.
Thank you, Your Worship. It comes as no surprise to you that my question's about a technicality. So, firstly, you talked about this transition authority, but that would again only be after the 2028 election, correct? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So my original question was, you talked about an outline proposal that goes on the 9th of August, but then a final proposal goes in May-ish next year with a final cabinet decision. Technically, if a council or councils choose to submit an outline proposal and they get accepted, they still have a further decision about whether they submit a final proposal or not, having done community consultation, having done iwi engagement, having done more detailed design and analysis. Is that interpretation correct?
So when Cabinet makes a decision in September, they are agreeing in principle that we're going to establish a unitary authority, and they're agreeing in principle to partner with local government entities that have put forward that proposal. That is a very clear signal that that unitary is going to be created. The detailed work is intended to, obviously put in place the level of detail that's needed to write the legislation to enable that entity to be created. Now, what you're highlighting is potentially throughout that process of doing the detailed design, councils and central government might disagree on a particular point, and councils might determine that they no longer want to progress with the unitary authority proposal. ultimately, Cabinet, because they are intending on progressing primary legislation, could still decide to progress with the proposal if a council grouping decided to no longer support the proposal. However, they'd have to weigh up the level of opposition to that proposal and the lack of support from those council groupings in making that determination. And so you're asking me to kind of be clear on, would government, let you walk away and say yes? And I can't give you that clarity at this point because ultimately it's a decision for them in May next year. And it will be influenced by whether or not the council still support the proposal or not.
I guess I was just being clear that you said this was a voluntary process, and a voluntary process with the proposal means that the proposing party voluntarily proposes something. We get that for the outline proposal, it would be voluntary. I'm just struggling to understand and give our councillors advice on if there's a detailed design phase and a detailed proposal to come later, but that may not be voluntary, then that's really saying that the final decision really is before the 9th of August, before all of that detailed work can happen. Can you see how interpreting it that way is a legitimate outcome of what you?
Well, I can see how, from your perspective, that it might be something that needs to be worked through with your council. I think from central government's perspective, what we're asking is for you to tell us what's best for your region. This is a voluntary process, and so if you're not ready to do that on the 9th of August, then you can go through the backstop. But when you get to the 9th of August and you put forward a proposal, you're telling us that whatever the unitary model is for your region is in the best interest for your region. And so, that's kind of, that's what we're asking for. And if you're not ready on the 9th of August, then there is a different pathway.
I guess my final comment on that was it's how you answer those questions, I think, shifts people's thinking about how weighty the 9th of August decision is and how much room there is to refine that and further get the relevant information and community feedback before a final decision to submit another proposal. And clearly that's going to have an impact on how councils and mayors proceed.
Thank you. Deputy Kevin Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew's just stolen one of my questions. But if I refine it slightly more, how tightly, how tightly constrained will those councils submitting an initial proposal be held to that, given that we clearly do not have the ability to consult meaningfully under the Local Government Act with our communities before the 9th of August, and the expectation that we'll do that afterwards. But if it's a fait accompli, the feedback we're getting is what's the point? So my question is, how tightly will you tie to your initial proposal and how much wriggle room so we can meaningfully consult with the community? One more question after this.
I mean, ultimately, what I'm signalling here is Cabinet's going to make decisions again in May next year, right? And so things can change from your outline proposal being submitted and the final proposals being agreed. We do intend on supporting councils and working with councils to engage with communities through that detailed design phase. And that engagement is legitimate in terms of understanding what communities want and how that might influence the design of the proposals. And so we expect that there will be changes as a result of that detailed design phase. And we will need to work through what those changes are with ministers and cabinet and let them know why it might have changed from the outline proposal phase to the final proposal phase and the rationale for that, and seek their comfort in that design. What might be more difficult, and this isn't must kind of, it definitely won't happen, but let's just say you had a 2 unitary model that you proposed at the outline proposal stage, and then all of a sudden you get to May and it becomes a 4 unitary model. That probably is something that would be a bit harder to kind of reconcile with the earlier decision, because that would be a material change in how big, or how much local government you intend. And so that's the type of thing that I think would be a bigger change to a proposal that might be slightly unexpected, because Cabinet are asking applicants to put forward the model that they think is best for the regions on the 9th of August. And I don't think a big change like that would be something that they would necessarily intend through that process of engaging further.
Yes, one more, if you don't mind. That's all. So, helping my confusion here. Head start proposals, get assessed, gets across the line. We start negotiating. There is some detailed design occurs. Within a region, there will be councils that do not sit within that, and they will fall into the backstop. And there's a delay of up to 2 years. Yeah.
Yep.
Clearly, my common sense anyway. If you're going to plug those councils in somewhere, it's going to be into whatever the Head Start initial proposal was, which is going to fundamentally change the dynamics of whatever detailed design is going to go ahead with that. Would it not make more sense just to bite the bullet, cut to the chase and go, you know what, you're going to get plugged in straight away? Because you can have a whole group of councils designing stuff without these other councils in, who are then going to get plugged in and change the entire dynamics. Just
So,
interested in a response to that.
So the answer is it depends. So if you've got a region with 5 councils, 4 of you are ready to become a regional unitary authority, 1 of you is not. There is an option in the policy design to propose that 5th council is in, even if they're not ready to be progressed. What you're highlighting is potentially put forward a proposal. We have included the 5th one, and the 5th one's going to have to work through the backstop, and clearly in that design, that 5th one should be part of the bigger council. And why not make that decision now? Well, my response to that is the 4 councils have a choice in that scenario to put the 5th one in the proposal. And in May next year, when they confirm the design, Cabinet will have a choice about whether or not they put that 5th one into the group because it makes sense. The reason I say it depends is because not everything's going to play out that neatly where 4 are in and 1 is out. You might have a region of 7 where 4 are ready to propose a regional unitary authority, 3 are not. And we're going to have to deal with that. And those 3 could legitimately come together themselves as a sub-regional unitary through the backstop potentially. And so there are different outcomes that could play out around the country. So that's why I say it depends.
Thank you. Yeah, just to make people who can't hear probably, so just make sure that you do have your mic on, and Kenny might get you just a little bit. So thank you very much for meeting you.
So what I've heard, let's try to summarise what my understanding of it, clarify. So Head Start locks you into big decisions, but not the small ones. But there could be tidying up of things. Is that based summary of what you just said?
No, stranded districts. So the big decision, yes, the smaller decisions work through in the detailed design phase. I wouldn't say they're all small decisions because I think, around detailed representation, we're going to need to work through that in the detailed design phase, and that's quite important for communities, right? And so there are still some big decisions that we need to work through in the detailed design phase. So I don't think we necessarily will have resolved at the outline proposal stage. On stranded districts, Cabinet will have a choice to make this year. We are encouraging council groups to clear that understand the impact on them, because we will be analysing that as part of our assessment of the proposals. And so if we've got 4 in and 1 out, that will be an active consideration for us in the session proposal. It will provide advice to ministers about what it might mean for the council, what we might think might mean.
Thank you.
Thank you. Respecting that the Minister of Local Government does have discretionary, but ultimately does have power to make these decisions. But it will be very challenging for us to push communities and councils that are not willing to merge into a greater entity. And so who then carries the risk? Because we do also have market sensitivities. Every one of our councils has incredible staff that do a very valuable job, that provide core services to our community. And there is a real risk in these times of uncertainty that we will lose them. And this is something that we're already seeing in other sectors across the country, and not just losing from our districts, potentially from our country. So has that been considered and discussed at a cabinet level through this process on how they can, as soon as possible, provide that certainty? Because from from the 9th of August up until May is a long time of uncertainty, but a very brief time for us to then transition from or set up a transition plan to then be approved in time for the 2028 election. So I'm understanding and mindful of what Cabinet's trying to achieve. Do they also understand the very real risk that we could, in this time, really drop the ball on some core infrastructure, like talking about healthy drinking water coming through the taps, pipes that are not going to burst and damage our environment. Yeah, so yeah. Has that been considered, the market sensitivity?
Also, we've definitely received submissions that have highlighted capability and expertise leaving councils, and we've heard it directly, particularly in the context of regional councils, through the draft proposal that was released, and that they would be losing staff and expertise for key functions. And so that has been an active consideration on providing earlier certainty. Cabinet do intend on taking decisions in September about who will be in the head start, and so we will be able to provide clarity at that time about who might be intending on board in the military authority. There is going to be uncertainty for those councils that do progress through the backstop, but some of the feedback that we received through the draft proposal was about timing and readiness to progress local government reform. And so, in particular, the ability for some councils to progress spatial planning and the resource management reforms at the same time as local government reform. And so the design is intentional in that the backstop starts after the 2028 local body elections, because spatial plans will have been notified and agreed by that time. And so that was the sequence that was created to reflect that. That does create more uncertainty for councils that are in the backstop. But that was how it has been managed.
Thank you. And then just following on from that in terms of the readiness that you spoke about, has there been consideration or are we able to know as soon as possible how realistic it will be? Because say every single region in the country, if they do manage to put forward a proposal, how will that be staged in terms of Cabinet making a decision? Are they just going to spend one day and say yes, 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 and then we know, or are they expected to phase it where they say these whole regions will start with them, support them, you get the green light, but in 1 month's time or 4 months' time, then again, it's just the uncertainty on timing.
Yeah, so I mean, deliverability is a criteria in the start proposal, and so we will be looking at it as someone is that proposal can be delivered. And so that's a key thing for our consideration on how realistic are these proposals when they're put forward. What you're highlighting also, though, is what happens if we get a lot of proposals that are good and are deliverable, and can you practically do all of them at the same time? We will need to give ministers advice about the proposals, and we will need to tell them how much resource it will take to deliver them, and it will depend on how many proposals we think are worthy of progressing at that point in time. And I don't know how many of those we're going to get at this stage, but it will be an important consideration for them. There is a potential option where they progress a first group and then they have a second group that they get to next. But that's something that they haven't decided on yet. That could be one way of managing a lot of proposals coming in, some being further progressed than others. But that'll be part of our advice that we give them once the head start's closed.
Thank you. Just check, is there any further questions? Netuni? Sorry, Netuni and then Chair McDonald.
Through the chair, morning, Gula. Thank you for coming to our beautiful part of the world. Here in from 1 hour waiting here in the Bay region. I thought I would just share some of the early conversations that we're having in the nation of Kawerau, the metropolis city of Kawerau. Look, we've described the consideration of the Head Start proposal as voluntarily opting in, perhaps. And some of the conversations we've had in my homeland are actually, it's more the objection to being told through the backstop and having no say or ability to shape and influence. So there's a real difference about the some of the conversations that we held with the minister earlier last month, Madam Chair, around I'm so surprised with how many are actually opting in. It's not, it's the objection to not being able to shape the future at all. And we've been very clear in our community, this is not your council collecting community voice, iwi voice, and having a say and making a decision. The decision actually sits outside of our community. I think that's been missed, but it's incredibly important. There should be not be an approval by ministers who are making these final decisions, considerations around Head Start proposals. That's not at the feet of the council, Madam Chair. That the decision, final decision making is actually with ministers who don't live in many of these communities. Big ticket item consideration and question that I keep fielding is around proving the financial benefits. And I did hear earlier in your presentation, Kenny, that it's just a high level signal with further exploration. I would put to the table, Madam Chair, that given the Three Waters exploration, and given that the announcement was made in 2021 by Hanakeke Brennan back then, given that we sit in 2026, 5 years later, it was nearby impossible to be able to prove financial benefits in 90 days post the announcement. I do have a question, please. I've been asked about the referendum regarding land boards. That was at the insistence of the current government of the day. It's undertaken by our community with an outcome. I'm asked what happens to the decision that was made for retention of Māori boards. My question is either the advice, I'm interested in the advice that DIA are giving, or perhaps some of the signals that the ministers are saying and showing around this. Has the consideration around the referendum that was undertaken in the 2025 local body election being considered, or does that consideration or representation fall again on the shoulders of communities through these potential Head Start proposals?
So we have given advice about Māori representation more broadly, and different options that might be available when thinking about creation of unitary authorities, which are the ones I highlighted earlier. Right, you could go back to a poll referendum for a new legal entity to create Māori wards, or you could seek to reflect the decisions that communities made through that last referendum in the new structure of the unitary authority as a transitional measure, or you could create a statutory basis for Māori representation. We are asking, people are putting forward proposals to tell us how that might be managed within your region. But ultimately, to your point that you made earlier, the cabinet will be the one that decides here. And ministers haven't given us a signal about any preferred model around Māori representation yet, because we don't know who's going to put forward a proposal. We will need to have that conversation with them when we get start applications of how different regions are considering Māori representation.
And Chair Doctor.
My question is, has the government already undertaken an exercise of what unit councils will look like across the country already? Is my question. And is the process that we've been made to undertake an exercise being done to, one, look at and align what government or cabinet they have already decided, and at what point, if that is the case, will they share that with the regions?
I mean, I fielded this question at the Waikato Mayoral Forum and at LGNZ. I can, tell you that there is no decisions that have been made around how many unitary authorities there should be in New Zealand by this government. And this question has been asked in a different forum where they said, there's a map in the beehive with lines on it. No, there isn't. And ministers have a genuine openness and interest in what the region thinks it should look like. And that's why there is the provision for sub-regional unitary authorities and an openness to how they could work within a region. There is a clear signal in the cabinet paper that's been released, which says in any given region, up to 3 unitary authorities could be contemplated. So that gives you a sense of how much they might be thinking about across the country, but that's up to 3 in any given region.
Thank you. So my next question is, therein lies the dilemma for the neighbouring region at this point in time. Because if you what currently being discussed around this table is the possibility of 5 unitaries. Now, given we have to submit a proposal by the 9th of August, and obviously 5 unitaries are not going to be attended by the government, I would say. So what is the base entry then at that point? If the CLAs have not made a decision of lowering number, how do they then keep that discussion on the table without the Head Start proposal being closed? Is it we're looking at a 5 unitary proposition subject to, will that keep alive the ability to have a Head Start proposal, but use the period that you talked about to do the deeper dive to then continue that conversation?
So, I mean, I think the first thing is, that cabinet paper makes clear up to 3. I know, many people have had conversations with ministers, and ministers may have expressed, there could be some, could be slightly more than 3 potentially. All I would say is, if you come together as a region and you put forward a model and you can all agree that that's the model and it's 4 or if it's 5, you'll be putting together quite a strong case because you're all aligned on that being what's best for the region. And, Cabinet will have to seriously consider whether or not they agree or not. The second thing I would say is when you put forward that 4 or 5 unitary model, if you do put forward that model, you need to make a clear case against how it meets those criteria. And so, economies of scale is one of the things that you'll need to demonstrate with that bigger unitary model of 4 or 5, that I'd be interested in seeing that, but your region better than I do. If you don't get through the Head Start and you've got a 4 or 5 unitary model that's still the model, that'll be the ideas that will need to be progressed through the backstop. And if the Board of Mayors is the governing body that sits over the top of the backstop planning, well then, they'll be the ones that are considering it. If it's a Crown Commissioner that turns up, well, the intention will be to understand what the region got to through the Head Start and then use that as the basis for the planning going forward. And so, that's probably how it could work. But it just depends at this stage,
Thank you very much. We've got Mayoral, Drysdale, and then Tanchesh.
You got a hospital pass, but I'm sorry. I won't ask about the map that was saloon, like you can see, they have, see big districts of whatever goes through the country. So yeah, that's what I'm going to say. Look, I'm just wondering, there was, Shady mentioned about one of the improvement in the Head Start process, about economies of scale. I still don't know that there's anything up there that improves it. There is economies in larger scales, and I think we can all of these ideas in Wellington and so if you got any tips on where we can actually find that improves that, I'd love to see it. I know that the body does that. That's just one question. My main question is there's a massive difference between Mayor's Tauranga City and my little council down. And we were looking for as orphans in 3 Waters development that came with me, but actually came back again and was playing what so this is the body we've done on the different links between an urban and a rural community. Because the voice at the table, thankfully we've got better farmers actually speaking out of us. But will that be the only voice in the rural community? Because we certainly don't have the population voice comes with the own voice. There's talk about green fencing, talk about targeted rates, it's all sorted out. But it all comes back to what's the final model that's in place. And it'll come back down to the decision making of that entity, whatever it is. And I'm sorry if we look at the community, it's smashed. So I'm just wondering, is there some work on that? You can use this as an example. Anyone wants to use an example from that might be helpful. Take a look at it more in picture. As we have been identified also. So just any work on the difference between urban and rural, massive difference, and how we probably be employed to the table. We just simply don't have enough people.
So a key consideration is to maintain local voice for these proposals, and really one of the key things we are interested in understanding is that balance of the urban and rural voice about organisation and how that could work. You can look at the Auckland example where they've got their local boards and how they might work, or potentially, there's commentary where they might not work. What we're saying is through primary legislation, there's an opportunity to have a local board plus type of model, and they're getting the right level of decision making at that second layer of governance is a key part of making sure communities are represented and can continue to engage with things that they value. And there is an opportunity to tell us what that looks like for your community. We have received the Federated Farmers submission about the different unitary models where you could have a metro and provincial and different responsibilities and how different services could work. So we have had a chance to look at that. But really we are saying it's over to the reader for them. And whatever we propose when you put it forward. On your question around economies of scale, there are services that are delivered by territorial authorities that are delivered in very different ways. And some are delivering at very high cost, some are delivering them at lower cost, and there might be different reasons that are specific to their context. But by and large, if you start to bring some of those functions together, you might be able to create some savings through scale. I take your point on water, and so it really is dependent on your region, and we are asking you to tell us where that could happen, and we might realise some of those economies of scale.
Thank you, Mitras.
Yeah, thank you. Just very quickly a comment. I think to the Mayor Moore's perspective, it's all about representation and how you design that system. And I just argue that we're not going to have total voting if we were one unitary, for example. We're having a vote in a unitary, so that they're there to represent the whole region. And I guess my argument is, do you feel that the any regional council have no voice from the podium? Because that's about representation. I don't know the answer to that, but there's an example of one that they deliver for the region. But my question, just around the lines on the map, is that something that we can look at? If it makes sense, that actually not be bound by the lines that are currently there.
So we have put on in the proposal the opportunity to adjust boundaries. It's not the focus of the Head Start. The Head Start's obviously about amalgamating into unitary authorities. But we do understand that when you consider things like amalgamation into unitaries, that there might be an opportunity to change boundaries, and that boundaries don't always work at the moment either for some of the TAs that span multiple boundaries and have different regional councils, working within, their territorial authority area. And so, yes, you can change boundaries. We're just asking that you make a clear case for why that boundary should change, and if it does impact on one of your neighbours, that you work with them on what the impact might be for them. We're under no illusions that they might not agree with you about that boundary change, but understanding the impact on them will be something that we will need to consider. And if you don't tell us what it is, we'll need to go out and figure it out ourselves.
Followed by Jimmy.
Thank you, Paula. I was just trying to thank you for coming today. It's really important for us to be able to engage with you about this. Want to say, I've said before, I don't view your role, and we asked to provide clarity to a bunch of local government elected people. It seems like there's not a lot of clarity. In fact, it feels a bit like policy being made up as we go along. So you do a very good job addressing that. My question around I must make some comments around functions going to the central bit. Particularly, I'm thinking about opportunities for environmental stuff. Is that thinking we
So in the policy document, I think what we signal there is that there will be a work program led by the Ministry for Cities, Environment, Regions and Transport, the new ministry, that looks into a national regulator and what roles they might take on that would, come from the regional council. And I think signalled in that document is things like compliance and enforcement. That work program hasn't started up yet. It says it'll start up once the bills are enacted, and that will free up some space for the kaimahi who work at the Ministry for the Environment currently to step into that work program. And that work program will be working alongside local government stakeholders to determine where that boundary is around what central government takes on and what's maintained regionally. And so not at the moment is the answer. I do understand that creates uncertainty for you as you consider putting forward a Head Start application about what functions you might actually still be taking on. But that work program will be done.
Thank you for that question. Meeting.
Yeah, so is it possible we put a Head Start proposal in that we have, this is what we prefer, it's not some proposal, but if recognising might be a stretch for what Cabinet's thinking, that some other position would be, if that's not in the business, not very well, it's still be a bit dense, a difficult option. Is that possible to do?
They're asking you to put your penny down on what you think is going to stop everything. I wouldn't try and hedge against what you think they might or might not be up for. Like I said, I don't think they have a fixed view on what might be appropriate regionally. They are asking for you to tell them what is best for your region. And, hedging in your proposal will suggest that perhaps you don't have a firm view on what is the better model. And so I have heard this discussed in other contexts, and that maybe we put forward options for Cabinet to consider and then they can tell us what's best. That's not what this proposal is designed for. We want you to tell us what the best option is.
I guess what I'm getting at, we might have a third option and put a Head Start, but I wouldn't want that to be rejected and then you're into the backstop and end up with your third place option, but then could be the second place option you want to go with.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, we'll give them advice on your preferred option, and if you want to signal that there is a different option, it's over to you. Ultimately, it's your proposal. But like I say, the strength of the proposal comes in the conviction that it's provided to the government with. And, if the region, and go back to the earlier point around 4 or 5 unitaries, if the whole region came together and said, this is what's best for us, that's quite a strong position to be in as a region. So, you said it's going to be a regionally led proposal. We as a region have come together and this is the model that we think is best for us. That's the kind of way I would encourage you to think about your proposal.
Thank you. We'll look to start to wrap up shortly. We currently have Seki, Stace, Deputy Kevin, and then me, Julie. Let me know if there's any final questions.
Thank you for coming today. Also, a lot of discussion about numerous complexities to consider through the process. Consultation, representation, decarbonisation, etc. I guess one concern I have is that during the design phase, some of these things might take longer to work out than time allows. So I was just curious around how rigid is the 2028 implementation deadline if you were in the Head Start process.
So it's all been designed so that the legislation's enacted before the local body election in 2028, so that people can vote for the governance that's going to lead the new entity. And so we've worked back from that, and that's how we've got to this design of May 2027 confirming the detail. Obviously, if we haven't got all of the detail done by May 2027, we're going to need to take a little bit more time and go back to Cabinet. There is probably time to spend a little bit more time working on the detail. But the goal of having the legislation in place before the 2028 local body elections is still there. And that's to firstly create the entities, but also to initiate the backstop. And so that is why we're working to the time frame that we are. But it could take a little bit more time than May 2027 to make decisions. Obviously, there's going to be a new government, regardless of who's in, and they will need to work out what their priorities are. They'll be focused on their 100-day plan or whatever the equivalent is, and we'll have to work out where this sits within that plan and when we might be able to get decisions from them.
So just to confirm, so if you're in the head start, the expectation is it's implemented by 2028.
You have the governance layer. We will work through implementation and transition plans of how you bring those organisations together and when. We are seeking your guidance on when you think that's feasible to do.
Thank you. Deputy Chair.
Thank you. In Qantas, you are listening, so try not to shoot you. Leveraging off, as those comments around 3 waters and local waters done well, lessons learned. I would respectfully suggest it's a lesson observed unless you take the learnings from that and apply them in a future tense. That's when the lesson is learned. One of the lessons we could have learned from this is that waters cost a fortune to transition. And I know on Tuesday this week, Waikato Waters had their initial kickstart and Cambridge. And I'm conscious of the ministers or government's commentary around who's going to pay for this. At the moment, all of us and our communities. Up to the 9th of August, the cost respectfully will be minimal, still a lot, but it's going to cost a fortune going forward. Is there any intent of the government to realistically look at the cost and learn a lesson from waters that it costs a fortune to transition and it's still going to cost a fortune to apply the same kind of money or more to this transition process?
So there's 2 things. I think the first one is, there is no funding currently allocated to this work. You will have all seen the budget come out. And so there's no funding at this stage. The second point, though, is go back to my earlier point around funding and financing. If funding is a thing that's necessary to support the transition to a new unitary authority, then I encourage you to put that in your proposal because it is something that the government will need to consider. And we will need to provide advice to them about the funding and financing tools that might be necessary to create these new entities and to establish them well. And they'll have choices there. But I take your point about how it costs to establish water entities. We will give them advice about that.
So thank you for that. I hear you and I accept that, but I struggle to accept that Cabinet could be so naive to think that this is not going to cost a fortune and that they would need to put money in to make this happen.
Thank you. Me too. Thank you. Not so much a question, but really just an observation. 10+ years that I've been in the world of local government, I've learned that languaging is everything, and the words that we use to convey our message has such a huge impact for people that we represent. I've heard lots of comments in the comment keeps getting made and repeated around council's willingness, appetite, readiness, all lack thereof. I really just wanted to share that I'm not sure how things are done in central government, but definitely on the ground in local government, we are obliged and honoured to be able to go to our communities, to be able to seek authentic feedback, Madam Chair. So I just would like to caution some of the languaging around just councils not being ready, councils not digging their heels in the sand. That is not what is going on. Each of the councils, I'm sure, around the table here in the Bay Plenty area, we have 8 territorial authorities representing close to 500,000 sons and daughters of the Bay Plenty. Sorry, I will exaggerate, it's about 400,000, potentially 9 partners, Mayoral, potentially. And I would just like to just put a marker there, Madam Chair, that it is not a case of unwillingness, non-readiness, there are lots of conversations, particularly under the storm or swarm of reform that sits when it lands in local communities. It falls on the shoulders of representatives such as those at our table to explain all of these things while continuing to work with our family staff to deliver business as usual every day. It's just a comment, Madam Chair. I'm hearing the unwillingness and readiness. That's unfair and that's inaccurate. There's lots of consultation happening all at the same time.
And on that note as well, I do want to acknowledge that actually as a Bay of Plenty region, we've been very proactive even before the government push. We were already seeking to see what shared services we could do in order to deliver not only efficiencies but better affordability for our region. And I'm sure that that would also be the case in other regions. We're very lucky that our Bay of Plenty region already is working quite closely together, but there certainly are some distinctions and some uniqueness within our communities as there is across the country. We'll take a final question from me to Josh.
Thank you. So it was a clarification, and because my total support is so I just points to cost and stuff. It's a really point to take that stuff. In your answer, I just wanted to clarify. I think I heard you say earlier that councils that are involved in the Head Start process may have funding and finance mechanisms available to them, which won't be available to councils who have started. Yes, is that correct?
So there'll be there's new legislative tools that could be created and options that could be created through primary legislation that currently aren't available to local government. I don't know what they are. We're seeking some suggestions from applicants about what tools we could create. You know, we probably got a high level idea of some of the things that could happen. The Head Start group will get the first opportunity to access funding and financing tools. Whether or not the backstop applicants are given any support, it ultimately will be a decision at the time they finalise decisions about the backstop. But the Head Start group will be the group that they are faced with those questions first about, you know, how they do support them. So
it's very unjust if councils who are short in a position that these path were left in the cold with some of those opportunities.
And so just finally for myself, as we are starting to go through our long-term plan process, which we are hearing, it's still a legislative requirement. What happens to our long-term plan if we do end up in the Head Start program? There's a significant amount of work, as I'm sure you understand, as well as cost, as well as community consultation. But again, if the Cabinet decides in May, just before we are going to adopt an LTP, which we're spent a whole year on, is there any indication from Cabinet, or to be frank, is there any understanding from Cabinet about that significant piece of work that we do for our community? Only once every 3 years that actually determines what we will invest and borrow for the next 10 years.
Yeah, so there's three things that commonly come up in conversations with ministers from local government, which be the LTP, the representation reviews and audits. And so they've got it front of mind that those things, if you're in the Head Start, at times might not, sequence very well and could be a cost that could be avoided if done slightly differently. And so there's an openness from ministers to consider how they might, provide some relief to the local government sector in that regard. I encourage you to put them in your proposal so we have that basis to give them advice on. We are looking at the LTP in particular. We're working with the Office of the Auditor General about what an LTP light might look like. We know if you're going to come together as a unitary, it doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense to think about the next 10 years. But the work that you do over the next 2 years will actually help inform Head Start proposals. And so what could an LTP light look like? Ultimately, the Office of the Auditor General is going to lead us here on the non-legislative options we might have. If that's not satisfactory, we could always think about legislative options to create some relief for local government, and that will be a choice for ministers. The legislative program at the moment is quite jam-packed, as you might imagine, and so it might become something for the new government to consider early in their terms. But I do note your point around LTPs in May.
Thank you very much, because there is again a real risk that we do a light LTP, nothing changes, we haven't planned well for the next 10 years, and or everything changes and we set community expectations that they will get some assets that will never come to fruition. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, Kenny, and also Rebecca. What we're going to do now is take a short break for 10 minutes and we'll come back at 11 o'clock. When we come back, we'll talk about shared services and functional review. Before going into the vacancy regional spatial plan. Just by the way. So we're back into our agenda. But what we'll actually do now, just to round off this particular discussion, is I'll now invite Mayor Peter from King's Coromandel to overview a brief presentation that he's got. So we'll get those slides up on the screen. But thank you very much, Peter, for taking the opportunity to come and to present to us. And obviously, you've got a presentation that we'll go through. And I'll ask if you have any opportunity for questions at me before we go into our shared services and functions review. Over to you. Thank you.
Yes, Andy, thank you very much. It's me that needs to say thank you very much for having us here. And hopefully, in the next 10 minutes, you'll understand why I'm so appreciative of thank you for the opportunity. I just like to acknowledge my chief executive, Aileen Corey, who should be online. She was thinking about looking at something that didn't take in. So she's not able to be here today. She's not back. She will be watching. And don't believe me in the side like you would. Okay. So here we go. So I thought this was just a TCDC primer. So my purpose here is I'm not just here to be a spectator. My purpose is to want to help you understand a little bit about us and our district and who we are, why I'm here today, and what I see as the next steps. This will be in your minute back, so between the slides, I'll just talk to you briefly, but you'll be able to look at the detail when you see it. So this is our district, Thames Coromandel district, and you can see there it's currently divided into 5 wards. Starting on the left is the Thames ward, the next one up is the Coromandel Coal ward, the other one is the Mercury Bay ward, red one is the Tairua Paranui ward, and then the final is Harwood ward. So we have 5 wards. We have 5 community wards. So each of those wards has 4 elected members, and on each of those community wards, the councillors are also appointed. So we have a really strong local representation in the district. The numbers in the circles, though, tell the story. If you look on the bottom left, you'll see that the Thames ward has 11,500 usual residents and got 5,500 houses. If you go to the bottom right, from the tower, we have more houses than we have residents. Go up to Whitianga, to Mercury Bay, on the top right there, and it's almost 10,500 residents, 9,500 houses. That's just testimony to the fact that we are a holiday destination, that we have a lot of absentee ratepayers, a place that people come to holiday and have fun. And generally, where does that happen? On the East Coast, whereas you can see on the West Coast, there is much more. Look at Thames, that's pretty much what the average would be. 2 point something or other people per dwelling. based on our number of houses, that number of rating units, we would typically expect to have a population of about 1,000. That's what our district conceptually looks like. And that's why for us it's very important to think about those two groups separately. What does things look like from a population base, but what do things look like from a rating unit base? So we do have a lot of rating units compared to our population. On the left there, you'll see the population. So our resident population is about 32,000. In the summer, that's 110,000. So we have an infrastructure to cater for 110,000 people. Although most of the time we've only got 32,000 people there. And in a typical weekend, we would have 7,000 people living in our district. The middle map there is the map of deprivation. Some of you would be familiar with that, but the darker the colour, the higher the deprivation. So if you look at the top left, the whole Coromandel area in quite dark red, deprivation there is 9. Can't quite see it, but just right down at the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little bit which is actually the Thames Township. Deprivation there is 10. So we are a district, like I know we have districts here in PD where deprivation is promoted. And then on the right-hand side there, it's just the point that I was making before, that we have actually enough dwellings to cater for or to get to support a population of 69,500 people. Just something about what we've got. We've got 7 refuge transfer stations at 7 closed landfill sites. We've got 704 kilometres of non-state highway roads. So when we get hammered by a cyclone, we have 704 kilometres that we need to be thinking about. We've got lots of bridges and we've got 294k of footpaths. We have our waters in-house currently, right? So our water services is being provided by in-house. There you can see the detail of what we have there, 131 pump stations and so on. But in our stormwater, we've got 3,874 manholes, which somebody tells me is significant. I haven't worked out why, but we've got lots of manholes, which I suppose means they need to be monitored and maintained. Some numbers. So this is just a slide there on our industries. But typically it's been construction, because of the holiday destination, we've had actually a lot of construction going on. That's scaled back at the moment because of the general economic climate. But agriculture, forestry and agriculture are very important industries for us. And then down the bottom you see our contribution to export kiwi fruit, berries, agriculture, fishing and logs and so on are big contributors to our country's export comes out of our district. And interestingly, our debt per housing unit is $2,360. So we are in a strong position from a debt point of view. And there are a number of reasons for that, but part of it has been that we have a historical policy of paying down debt on our assets well within the lifetime of our assets. So typically we've been paying down assets for 30 years, maximum 30 years, and actually we end up getting the lifetime of assets. So that means a lot of assets are covered. So we're in a very strong debt position. So why are we here? Well, that's what I want to say, right? Because the reality is that we see being an option for us is the Bay of Plenty. And I'm going to just some business around all that. But there you have 2 scenarios. One which is the one on the left, which is whatever if a greater APT region were to evolve, then we could potentially see that. One on the right is what potentially would happen if what the work that we're doing around local water state of Mayoral, the Tauranga City Council, Western Bay District Council, that would be sort of joining all that up, extending what we are hoping will materialise around local water state well into a unitary authority there. And from our point of view, as we are considering our options, and these are obviously not the only options, but unlike anybody else in the Waikato region, or the northern Waikato region, we think we have a genuine option to be viewed as part of the Bay of Plenty. And if you look at that map on the left, you can see the coal top left, the point down the bottom right, absolutely, potentially, we're part of the Bay of Plenty. So, why do we say that? Well, why don't I just make that whole what is it? It's a geographic unit. It is a contiguous marine and coastal area. And the issues that we deal with on our east coast would be common right around the coast of Bay of Plenty. We have developed expertise in coastal management because we have 400 kilometres of coastline, largest coastline of any TA sealant. We have similar challenges around climate change and resilience, and there is significant catchment alignment for us in being part of that of Bay of Plenty. Not total, but a significant catchment alignment. So that's where we kind of look at that at a high level from that point of view. We see cultural alignment. We do share common characteristics and challenges. And I talked about the holiday thing and holiday destination. Obviously, marine and conservation community values are very, very important to us on the Coromandel Peninsula. Very important in the Bay of Plenty. We share some degradation. We have regulatory challenges around the marine environment. We have lots of absentee ratepayers and so on. Thirdly, so we see economic alignment. So we see obvious benefit in potentially being aligned or being part of a region where there's a large metro. We do, like have some big demand challenges, but many similar communities. We've actually had a good time working on local water state well. We haven't yet consummated that, but it's indicated to us a willingness and a way we can cross two districts and two regions, if you like, that has been to this point positive. And we share all of those things: tourism, agriculture, horticulture, those economies. We also believe that aligning or becoming part of Bay of Plenty does comply with what government. So we can see, just without getting into the detail, we can see that always complies with local governments. We can see about supporting new planning systems, those 5 things that are important to the government. And for our own internal purposes, as we look at our options, we're asking ourselves which of these are most important to us as we go through. So we're actually running a filter of the options that we look at. We are saying maintaining local voice is absolutely the number one for us. 30%, if there was built to 150%, we were looking to that 30%. Economies of scale 25%. Simplifying local governance, 25%. Supports the new planning system and deliverability, 10%. And I think it's important today when we hear me say that these are the trade-offs that DIA are going to be interested in. What trade-off are we making with regards, for instance, local voice? Does that mean we have to provide local governance? Which over those in the options that we're looking at. But that's the way, that's the first point we're going to be looking at various options. But we do have other options, and these options I've thrown up here are options from other territorial authorities' websites, where they have put up things that they see as options. So you can see on the left there, there's one which I would call the Eastern Waikato. There's one there which is called, which I probably call the Rural Waikato. There's one there which would be called the Greater Waikato. Right, so people are seeing that we're potentially being part of that. And then the one on the right is once again is kind of a Great Waikato, but also factors in clearly the coastal, the coastal region, which is obviously really important to us. So there are options, and I could I just say there are more. Right, I've just shown you a few there, but there are options in this stage that we are currently at. So we at the moment are just getting general community feedback. Right, we're seeking qualitative community feedback about what is important to our community. And we've gone out with a very short time frame, for just over a week, to say what are the things that are important to you. A little bit of guidance, but we want to know what are those things, because that will need to filter into our thinking. With that thinking and with the other work that we do, we'll narrow those options down to a short list. And when I say a short list, I'm expecting that we'll probably end up with 3, maybe 4 short lists. We will then go and get more community feedback around those specific options, presenting them with maps a little bit along the line of what Mr. Baker had done there. So it's a nice clear sort of document about where they got to, and to land on a preferred option by the 9th of August. What I have said to our council is we want to make sure that the option, the preferred option that we put out on the 9th of August is one that will get selected, if you like. So it's we are committed to an option that will meet the government's requirements, and mean that we can journey on that for the rest of the time. Having said that, I think there were some really very, very relevant comments that were made today in response to questions about how hard is the 9th of August as a commitment. I think that was a very insightful question and a very interesting answer. Also, what options are there that will change further down the track? And I just appreciate being here today to hear you smile every time I hear either a minister or government official talk. There's more information that's coming out. That's just notes here. So it's been very helpful. So, and I think when I raised this about representation, I think that this is absolutely critical. I have a view that the mechanics of what we currently deliver and what regional council currently deliver, that's happening, and experienced, capable managers will work out how to make that work in a new world. That will be a challenge, but it'll get there. I think the key thing we need to be thinking about is local voice representation. And there's raised that I think very, very strongly. And for me, that's a really critical thing. We need to absolutely know that we're putting in place something that means those communities get their voice. And for us, that's part of the reason why we currently have the community boards, because we have such diverse communities around our district, around the peninsula. In a new world, but it'll be different. But we have to ensure that we're getting local voice, and that local voice does get heard around the decision making table. On that point, I'm very happy to answer any questions. Should we be otherwise, you can just go and look at that website. after the stuff to so.
It's quite right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mayor Peter. We'll just open for questions if that's okay. Okay, Ben.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a good problem, see. Just have a couple of comments in. I've got a question too. I see these two problems. I mean, one one's taken, the other one's quite straight up. Join those up. Don't need to answer that one. Just follow this. So hopefully there'll be all the discussions. When you join that gap up. Oh, the gap. Yeah. So could I just be clear that I have spoken to Toby, and I have said to him that if we were to do this, it would make sense for us to join up the coastline and what have you. He has a view on that. Yeah. But it would just seem that that's going to be the case. That would be talking to them now. The other one's quite straight up on this one. And just a couple of comments in my thought is I've had 3 major weather events. I watched the weather quite regularly. You've had 6, might be 7. So there's a lot of elements here. We are in a corridor that we share the same weather patterns. And just on my real estate side of have you canvassed those non-resident ratepayers? The majority actually a couple in this direction at one either and you know is that aligning with what they're thinking? Because you potentially have one rate for many of them if you either way, and it's not joined by land, but it's joined by sea. There's another big player further up there. So in our long list of this Auckland's there, but the rules have said that we can't do anything with Auckland. And I think it was Mike at a Mayoral forum and Phil was speaking, and I said, well, he said, do you guys want Great Barrier Island? And I said, well, we'll take that responsibility and Waikiki as well. But so that's how, but it's clearly, you know, there is a catchment law around the Hauraki Gulf, and clearly it's important to us. In terms of the non-resident ratepayers, we have a huge number of live in Auckland, a huge number of live in Hamilton, and on each of the say probably suburb in district. We will be seeking their response. I suspect that what's important to them is the fact that they're able to get to their home and enjoy what we have to offer. I think, we, in terms of margin, we get it like right for our permanent residents, then our non-permanent residents will get whatever difference.
Any further questions? No? Well, thank you very much. You're very welcome, and as we know, there are no decisions being made yet, but we do really appreciate you coming to present to us as the Bay region as early as possible. So thank you. And of course, you're welcome to stay on if you wish, because we are just about to go into our shared services and functional review.
Well, I it's clear. I appreciate that.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. So we will. Perfect. So we will move now back to our agenda. We're going to go to page 23. We have shared services and functional review. So I will just first of all ask you, please just receive the report and remember to go forward receiving things. First by me to me, seconded by Mayoral. Please declare those who receive this report. Yes, that's carried. Thank you. And just a reminder, the recommendations that we are presenters endorses the process to identify additional shared services opportunities in the region, and also progressing the motivation in business case development in quality shared service opportunities, waste management services, building consent authority, IT services, and then continuing the functional review process, progressing shared service initiatives that support regional preparedness or anticipate local government reforms, and request chief executives to report back. So I'm saying that I'd like to hand over to. I'm now like to hand over to Stace to overview the report.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll take the report as very strongly that we could highlight a few key points. Firstly, we had mentioned obviously in previous forum the progress investigating cheap service opportunities with whiteboard session and CEs get together and a framework to move forward with. And Andrew just summarise that framework shortly. But before I do that, I'd just like to acknowledge all the CEs and a number of staff that have helped progress this body of work. It's been a real collaborative effort. I'm going to describe the report. David, so I acknowledge everyone today for moving this work forward. So it's not the thank you for that. And with that, I'll hand over to Andrew and I'll summarise.
Go to the next slide. So I'm not sure how much you all remember from the famed whiteboard session, but we walked away with a whiteboard and some markers and not a whole lot on the whiteboard itself. So fortunately, we did hear all your audio about the various different aspects of shared services that you were talking about. We tried to put it together and in some sort of structured format to reflect what we did. So if we think about a spectrum from the political, strategic through to the operational or tactical, we saw as CEs that we were hearing from you basically three different categories of kōrero. First one was around local government reorganisation. At that stage, that was determined to be part until we got the further government decision, which perhaps that's now been resurrected and potentially a discussion for today, but we did not progress any work in that space as chief executives. At the other end of the spectrum, if we looked at tactical approaches to shared services, what's ready to go now, and what are the opportunities for low-hanging fruit to both be analysed and implemented in a short time frame. Stacey might talk a little bit more about that, but I will talk about the in-between, which was taking a bit more of a functional view of our services and then applying the lens, a structured lens about what should be delivered individually, locally, sub-regionally, regionally, at a catchment level or nationally. And through that feedback, we also got this nuance of actually perhaps answering those needs another dimension, which is to say, well, where are they funded? Where are they governed? Where are they managed? And where are they delivered? And the answer to those might be different based on each service. So we came up with this matrix whereby you could evaluate every service, every function across how it might be funded, governed, managed, and delivered. And each of those things you would assign, it may be assigned either a local, sub-regional, regional, catchment, national, or in fact, an individual PACE recommendation. In order to do that work, we worked with work that the regional council had done to understand the whole local government system and those various contributing effects to how you might arrive at that determination. That all sounds very complicated, and it is. And what we did is we didn't go and solve this and do this work across our 50-odd different functions that would exist in both TAs and regional councils. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to bring you this approach with a suggested way forward. As was mentioned earlier, and it's in your packs, there's been some detailed work done on biosecurity to illustrate the point. And again, it's to illustrate the point and illustrate how it would be done. If we gain your endorsement for moving this forward, we would apply a similar approach to the other services and bring that back to you. Before I go to the next slide, which talks a little bit more about how this might be carried forward, I'll just pause for both questions, but also, Stace, did you want to talk about the tactical shared services here?
Yeah, if you want to go to the next slide, go through it, I'll carry on before I get any questions.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so if we take that functional review forward, this is again example only of a worked example of how those services might all be categorized, again against those dimensions of how are they funded, how are they governed, how are they managed, where are they delivered. Given the Head Start proposal, the suggestion is that if we take transport, catchment management and spatial planning forward as the key functions across which we might apply the framework that you've just seen, and as chief executives and staff would work on that and move that forward in the first instance, that would support any Head Start work that councils want to do either at a regional or sub-regional or cross-regional basis, because that information, that analysis would then support any Head Start proposal, because these are the three functions the government has stated in their policy document need to be addressed as part of the outline proposals. So that was our approach. Obviously, I just want to stress that what you're seeing here is simply a worked example. These are not solved. These are ideas. When you talk to different CEs and different professionals in the sector, they might have different views. It's important that we come together. We've got time as chief executives tomorrow to work on this, so that we come together with a collective view of those recommendations based on some sort of robust analysis rather than what you're seeing here, which is just a good example. I'll pause here.
Yes, that's it. So the other piece of work that was progressed in parallel was obviously the shared services initiative developed in NCA to then assess a number of shared service opportunities through that process that outlined a candidate list, priority list, and we've identified three options for progress. I'll just touch on those briefly. So IT was one of the highest scoring opportunities in the process, and there's already some shared service options being utilised in the Bay already. There's a couple of key reasons why this is an attractive shared opportunity to explore, and that is it actually has the ability to be staged. There is quite a range of options from just help-desk right to managed infrastructure, housing, cybersecurity, etc. But more importantly, in my experience in New South Wales, we've been through this in the local government reforms there and amalgamations. One of the more complex areas to navigate, more costly areas to navigate was IT and data. So starting from this early would be advantageous. The other two areas are looking to leverage off work that's already been undertaken. So BCA, although not scoring high in the NCA process, there's already been a large body of work done by CoLab, which is the BOLBLAS equivalent of Waikato, and we're proposing that instead of duplicating work that we actually just partner with them to progress the business case that they're about to engage with collectively. And then the third area is also waste services. Again, work's already underway. We've got the Waikato Bay Plenty regional strategy progressing, and the proposal was to also utilise the work that's been undertaken there and be deliberate again opportunities that shared services may play in that area of the business. So those are the three areas that have been selected through the process, and a little bit of justification as to why. Functional analysis was the other area that we've spoken about, and the third area that I just wanted to touch on in the report was about BOLBLAS itself. BOLBLAS has been highly successful in joint procurement and also implementing some loading improvement shared services. We're going to undertake a review of BOLBLAS to look at how BOLBLAS may contribute to work with the sector moving forward, just noting that it's changing on the horizon. It's an opportunity for us to review the function on BOLBLAS moving forward. We've got through our changing process and see if that would be a suitable vehicle to assist in the future. With that, happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that sort of pivot to doing the three key things. We mentioned that this morning. I think that's a smart play. I guess that was my question on this. I think it works really great. It's just do we just pause that stuff now because we don't know where we're going to end up, and we pause it till after these start. you know, we could take it up there, and if we refocus on this, I think that's really smart.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. The next being part of the consideration how we approach the shared services. We're targeting those ones that actually is already work in progress. And it's really a no-regrets approach to lean into that and continue to see how those opportunities may fish out and support any future reform, particularly in the IT space as well.
Yeah.
So we've approached it in a way that we can continue to do this in parallel. With the idea that there would be good support for each other, but in particular, like particularly functional review targeting with content supporting it. So
yeah. And I think that's my flip side of it is this actually worth showing us some examples of what it could be as well. So that's the problem.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Yes, thank you. A good example is the rating system required in the future. So whatever the form of local government in this region, we need to focus on the revenue that is generated. Work on that would have to start soon to enable that to transition well. So that is a good example in terms of potentially a shared service. But looking at now, so that is one of the functions that is up and running as quickly as possible.
Any further comments? We have had a suggestion on whether or not to pause. Have you got Jenny?
Yeah, that was sort of going to be my comment as well. I don't want it's sort of an excuse to stop it, but I do wonder if we could have potentially just overtake what we're doing. So I do think the main decisions until September or something like that. So, there might be working counter back, but stop it overtake. Making more of us
yeah. So pause for groups of prioritising Head Start until after. I could tend to agree with that, but we'll see if there are any further comments.
Your wish, yes, and look, that's exactly what, as we talked about, what the potential outcome might be, just for the functional review, rather than the shared services immediately. The functional review, whether these three actually they're going to support any work the councils do for Head Start. So this would be the work you might pause other things in order to allow us to proceed with this. So that's what we're trying to prepare for. So is that what I'm hearing from the demands, that you prioritise the work that would Head Start? But then there are other pieces of work like the cross-regional waste strategy, which probably there's no opportunity cost to continuing with at this stage. So states might have a view on that.
Yeah, we're well aware of the workload pressures, and that priority is focused particularly on Head Start for those that are willing to the priority for Head Start. So the proposal isn't that with all our energy and focus on that shared service funds and the cost of progressing work associated with Head Start. The idea is that we continue to work on these shared services in parallel, but noting that the priority is Head. So what I'm suggesting is that we continue to focus on these shared service areas, but they don't come at the cost of prioritising work that goes on Head Start. So, for example, CoLab are about to pull together and progress the business case for looking at the BCA. It would be a shame for us to say it was pause, and then they progress without us. Whereas actually it's not going to add a lot of workload for our staff by going, okay, we can partner because you're actually doing work on our behalf. So I think my suggestion would be that we don't pause these, but we to be very conscious that the priority is these other areas that we've spoken about, and that we can utilise, and it could be the opportunity that we use like Bopless, for example, to progress some of these over onto the side.
Thank you. So just in terms of the recommendations that we have in front of us, we'll be seeking the support approval of meets of the recommendations in front of us. We're just noting that thank you. Yeah.
Yes, and it might be that we need to Auckland Council or Mayoral Council to come and speak to future mural form, because the key is with the changes, the period of transition, and how long it takes, and this is really Auckland and Mulgreaves, the transition to a new form of government took a long time. So Auckland's case was 15 years, and Mayoral 5 years. One of the things that I just have in the back of my mind is taking 10 years to get an email address for the Minister for Health Centre in the country. 10 years to get one common email address, and we can do better here by looking at shared services and what we can put together well on to transition to a future marriage. What Andrew's talking about in terms of just very skeletal in terms of where we have the greatest impact. And for future rates capping is important to do as much of shared services as possible, especially some of these banking services that our communities don't see, but are enabled you to get efficiencies so that you can improve rates capping in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosa.
Yeah, I think listening to the conversation, I think I'm quite comfortable leaving it to the CEs to kind of prioritise them and give a direction around, do anything that you can, but prioritise its obviously this functional stuff is really important. If there's opportunities for collab, etc., that we can progress easily, we've got capacity, let's do it, but we just that we need to prioritise as our priorities.
Thank you. See, Marty?
Thank you. So of course the current recommendations as they stand, it's complementary, I compromise the work there needs to collaborate to get started. There's already a good body of thinking and work already behind us, so I think this will just contribute to the future of local government moving forward.
Okay, thank you. We seem to be down to just agreeing that the recommendation should go through. Are there any final questions regarding what's being presented? The only one I have is at what stage can we provide an update to our councils? But I'll just leave that with the chief executives and each that will be to consider. Just so, I mean, I've verbally told my councillors that there's this piece of work going on, but we'll just be mindful of that as well, so that they're aware that we are already and we're already what shared services for sense.
Thank you through the chair. One of our learnings, as we've been discussing shared services, and I've heard the languaging, and I'm going to bore the Mayoral Forum by this, but actually the suggestion from the current government that we're starting the exploration of shared services, which is not true. We've done ourselves a disservice actually by implementing some shared service cost savings and just not lifting it up and giving visibility. So that's a piece of work that we've been working on, and while continuing to show for efficiency, for cost saving, whatever it might be, the continuation of shared services, not the just because a head start was introduced, now we're all getting our act together and starting this piece of work. Madam Chair, that is not the case in the vacancy. So just encourage our CEOs to continue that work and take advantage of the bulk face arrangement again. And just a reminder really to ourselves that the introduction of this new priority of work and the head start was not from this forum, but was introduced as well. On top of everything else we do, Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. And see, Marty.
Yeah, just further to that, we did a stock take, but so ago over the last 15 years of the work that has gone on in the past throughout on shared service. So I'm quite happy to circulate that to CEs and then themselves.
Thank you very much. There was a suggestion maybe get some other councillors. I have talked with Deputy Meg Desley from Auckland, who is very happy and open to coming to if we want. So I think it would be useful to hear how Auckland is going with and ask questions there. I will confirm as a okay, well, I have read out the recommendations. I'll take the rest of the report as read. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you. Yeah, moved by me too, and seconded by Fox. All those in favour, please say aye. Any against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to our Mayoral Regional Spatial Plan. Thank you so much to our staff who have very patiently waited for this graph page 39 of our agenda. I'd like to welcome Stephanie Kelly and also David Metro, and we have Manini Abu. Thank you very much. Okay, so it's now Stephanie is our acting group manager district development. Damon is our manager spatial and policy planning relates council, and Manini is spatial planning team leader and integration council and active presentation.
Good morning, Natato, through you, Madam Chair. We're just here this morning to provide you with an update on the pre-enactment phase of the Mayoral Regional Spatial Planning Program that all of the TAs are currently participating in. We have a number of slides to run through. Some of this information has been presented to you previously at the March Mayoral Forum, so we will try and be as succinct as possible. I'm going to hand over to Damon to lead this conversation, but we ourselves and the staff of the Regional Council are happy to take your questions.
Good morning. Very much a collective effort across councils, so we're representing the body of work that has been done since the last Mayoral Forum. I think it's important to just note, I guess, that this is the pre-enactment phase of the Mayoral Regional Spatial Plan Program. So it's work that will be done, obviously at haste, building up towards the enactment phase. And it's important to note, obviously, the actual development of the regional spatial plan will happen once legislation is in place. So obviously there's a bit of movement until then in terms of getting things into gear. And then you'll see, you would have received the update and progress paper, which lays everything out we'll be touching on today. And that was shared obviously with our various regionalised spatial joint committees. In some instances, they've been set up for this process. In other instances, I guess they've been in place, and obviously also shared with the councils themselves. Yeah, just in terms of context, obviously Steph mentioned the 12th of March, that was the key sort of meeting of the Mayoral Forum where, it was agreed that we would take a sort of a foundational non-regrets work program forward. And the key elements of that was really focusing on partnership with iwi, early engagement with stakeholders, developing a draft process agreement with options, and also creating a draft program plan for the development of the regional spatial plan. And then undertaking technical preparation work, which is being underway at first, which is really a data stock take, what we've got across the regions, or across the council, should say, and a gap analysis of the existing regional spatial plans like the FDSs and strategies that we've put in place prior to this. I think, as you would probably know, the planning and environmental bills are progressing through Parliament, the parliamentary process, with the Environmental Select Committee report due back at the end of June, 26th of June, I think. And then the enactment is expected to take place in August and September, and we're towards that date. Obviously, while the final flow of the legislation is not known, obviously this non-regrets approach is really to ensure that time is not wasted during this window, because we know that post-enactment, the timeframes are pretty tight. We're also obviously monitoring the impact of simplifying local government that was discussed today, but we feel that obviously our program will continue with the program as planned. Our sort of bottom-up approach that we've taken in relation to this, which is to look at all the existing sub-regional spatial plans, and also a top-down approach, which is looking at regional matters. Obviously, we feel will stand us in good stead, and we'll still obviously be able to utilise whatever happens local government arrangements. And then we continue to develop process agreement options and going forward. Just in terms of the regional deals, the Western Bay regional deal includes a joint commitment to refresh the Western Bay of Plenty sub-regional spatial plan, which will be part of the combined plan for the Bay of Plenty under the new system. And the deal implementation, planning is currently underway, and will obviously, as far as possible, avoid duplication as a key principle of the exercise. And depending on the final legislation timeframes to develop this RSP or regional spatial plan, obviously the Western Bay sub-regional plan will be refreshed in that context. So, bottom line, things will be progressed in parallel in relation to that. In terms of other reforms, we feel that through this approach, regardless of legislation requirements, we feel that the evidence options being developed through this sort of project program will be better, obviously, will be better for decision-making across councils, as well as avoids duplicated efforts. So we're aligning ourselves through this process and working in a more efficient manner through this process. So we think we can be more agile, I guess, as legislation goes. Just in terms of the next slide, I think you've seen this spatial plan structure before. It really sort of lays out, I guess, the key elements of what the spatial plan would look like. Obviously, with existing structures in place, things may look different when things get enacted. Just an important point to add there is that we've added the offshore islands that are managed by the DIA. And I think it's important to know that 2 of the islands have district plans that would obviously need to be considered in the process. So Motiti and obviously Mayoral Island are those 2 islands. And another thing to note is that the March Mayoral Forum sort of asked us to provide a right to the minister to confirm this approach. You'll see it as attachments to the document that you received today as both the letter that was sent to the minister and the response. And his response was basically to say, look, he supports, I suppose, our proactive approach and also supports the activities by and large, but did stress that the RSP must align to the new legislation and national instruments that will land it. So obviously we'll keep our eye on that as that unfolds. The next slide, there's a lot of narrative on the slide, but we thought that might be a useful tool to take away. I think we can provide this to you afterwards. It basically puts the whole program on the page, kind of like a plan on the page, and it outlines the key elements of the pre-enactment phase work undertaken. So I think quite useful. It sort of lays out work streams, the key risks involved, the milestones, and right at the bottom, it's got the legislation timeframes or the reform implementation timeline that you can look at. But it's a useful takeaway that and will encapsulate what we'll be doing over the next couple of months. Then just in terms of the expected legislation timeframes, we are anticipating, I guess, the bills to land will be enacted in August and September, and then more national policy direction will land in June next year. And then December is when we actually have to notify the regional spatial plan. Obviously, down the line in June, the following year, that's when the plan will be, decisions will be made concerning the plan will be in place. But then also noting that in the following year, in 29, we'll be notifying land use plans are critical at a local level, and obviously the natural environment plan. So quite an intensive program over the next couple of years. So we'll be using, we're trying to use that time pretty widely now in terms of gearing up for that. Just in terms of our program timeframes themselves, that lays out the timeframes. I think quite the 2 critical products, I guess, that we're developing at the moment is the process agreement, which outlines the key geographical areas and the issues and options that the regional spatial plan will have to focus on. It also sets out how local councils will have to effectively work together in this sort of arrangement alongside, I suppose, key infrastructure providers, development groups, and other sector groups. And they will include the structure of the spatial planning committee and the secretariat. I think an important caveat is that this is in the context of what we know now, as opposed to what might land through, I guess, the direction when the forms become enacted, rules become enacted. The other element is the program plan, which covers the tasks that are required to develop the actual regional spatial plan. And then there will be activities also addressed to ensure, that we quickly transition or establish the spatial planning committee and the secretariat soon after enactment. So we're sort of ready to roll when that happens and can straight away start developing the RSP. So this will be encapsulated in a paper, with this draft process agreement and options that we will take to the various committees that have been established, as well as to the councils, and then obviously it will be taken to this forum in September for discussion. So that's essentially a critical Mayoral forum meeting in terms of this pre-enactment phase. We'd obviously seek endorsement on the principles that underpin the process agreement, as well as the direction on some of the key matters. And this will include some potential options that will help us shape and draft the process agreement. And then after enactment, that program control group that are managing things now will refine the process agreement and options, and then obviously work on developing sort of final agreement, obviously after looking at the direction. This will then trigger the establishment of the Spatial Planning Committee and the Secretariat, which will be responsible for developing the regional spatial plan itself. So in terms of the progress in that report that you received, the key thing was obviously developing that letter to Minister Bishop and receiving a response. We also established a program control group with the technical subgroups involved. We also have got a plan which is actually taking place today in relation to making regional councils Tamarangi units together with the program team that will be coordinating a discussion with the other councils, iwi policy units, and we'll have a discussion really around how we approach civilian engagement with the iwi across the region. Wanted to note that we've had 2 subgroup workshops held around how we establish the process agreement options. The work is underway on that. And then also 2 workshops around the program plan, which is around how we develop the actual regional spatial plan. And then council partners and central government agencies will obviously be working together to finalise the draft stock take analysis. We've had an engagement on that at this stage, and it's quite a substantial body of work that's already been, I suppose, co-located for us to utilise going forward. There's a draft communications and engagement framework that's also been developed, and really the pre-enactment activities in this regard have been focused on high interest and high influence partners and stakeholders to communicate essentially what's happening, but also why pre-enactment preparation in our context is very important. And then just finally, just in terms of the immediate next steps, I guess it's essential that we get partnership with iwi early on this process. We're earnestly doing that. And then also the ongoing engagement with partners and key stakeholders is happening all the time. See that's going to start ramping up as we start fleshing out the process agreement options, which is also part of the next phase. So it's the next Mayoral forum, which is really just getting that process agreement options reports and program plan for you guys to give us direction going forward. So that's an update from this.
Thank you very much, everyone. So we'll just open for questions if you know that this will come back as we can in September. Councillor, sorry, Mayor Drysdale.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, good presentation, understand, we talk about key stakeholders and partners, etc. So my question is, we're sitting here representing our councils, but what involvement do our councils have in this and
It just mean in terms of structure of engaging across the council. So I suppose we've got those joint committees that have been set up, and they're really quite fundamental in having early discussions. Those joint committees, obviously, with regional council and the relevant council. So there's a number of those that have been set up. I think the only difference is when it comes to Eastern Bay, there's a number of councils in that joint committee. But that's where things get sort of discussed in more detail and then taken to council. And then from there, we obviously take it to the Mayoral Forum. So there's quite a bit of engagement that's taking place both at a political level and at a technical level. We're working in those various subgroups. Didn't go through all of them in detail, but it's on that one sheet that are reflected up there. And in each of those subgroups, we have representation across each of the councils. And that's the sort of technical.
I guess what's that's smart growth. I'm guessing we're talking about for us. But yeah, I think it's actually taking the councillors as well, noting that that's not all council laws are on those groups.
I was thinking that, that's like happening is the diagram. The regional, the regional social planning structure agreement that's right on slide 4. So so what we've got there is that we've got the growing committees obviously from Western Bay, which is Cyprus, and this joint committee, in terms of reference, notice to review the regional special planning. And then we've also got the council's meetings as well that were factored in. So some councils have opted in for updates on regional special planning to go to the first joint committees. So our program is being sort of defined in a way that we have workshops and outcomes and reports prepared in time for going to councils first, then to joint committees before coming to the Mayoral Forum. That was the approach that was endorsed at the last Mayoral Forum that was having, would be making sure the material was being going to the councils for review and opportunities for input feedback into workshop.
Thank you very much for that. We're now going to be
Thank you, Chair. I'm just conscious we have said so how if Thames Mayoral District Council was to become part of an arrangement with either Western Bay and Borough or the whole region, do they become part of the Bay of Plenty? Do they become part of the Bay of Region Spatial Plan, or how might that be managed?
Thank you, Andrew. You, Madam Chair. I guess the devil will be in the detail when the bills stand, but we're anticipating that regional spatial plans will need to align with any new regional boundaries that might fall out of the Simplifying Local Government Act process. The approach we've taken with the regional spatial plan is very much bottom up, so sub-regional focus, so that things can be carved out more easily looked in. I'm not sure of things current spatial planning processes or what they might have in place, but the approach we've taken is that things can be edited or carved out. So I think it will, assuming that they have something to edit, that can be done easily.
Thank you.
I could just make a comment to it, like Spheres. There is a project that we have on this happening at the moment. So it's a rather project for us, which was passed by council resolution I think last year. We'll see with special plan for our district with a view to it forming part of whatever regional special plan needs to be developed.
Thank you, Chair.
through the chair, please. I find it interesting that the enactment of the bills or the bills coming into law is exactly the same time frame as the establishment of the simplified local government tax law decision that's been made. Just some observations. Look, I just think, Madam Chair, in preparation and readiness for the regional spatial planning, what we understood at the beginning of this training is that each of our sub-regions had spatial plans in place. We've done, but we've gone out and had the conversation, so it gave us a really strong foundation to be able to prepare for this. I also had a thought about the simplified local government, some might say the amalgamation, establishment, dilution of councils. Yet I hear the need to create a program control group around a specific piece of work. It's interesting that we are trying to simplify that thinking and approach for me for this key piece of work actually heads in a different direction of simplifying and creates the need for another group. That's not a criticism, by the way. Thank you. I appreciate you going through all of the material to be able to highlight that for us. Thank you to for your work. It took us a while this morning. I appreciate that, but you've heard all of the considerations, and I would encourage us. Again, in local government, often we will silo pieces of work. Just encourage and welcome you to integrate and work with all of the pieces of work that are on the table at the moment. There are a lot, but we appreciate the team that's here this morning, Madam Chair, to be able to keep your eyes specifically on this piece of work as we start to head towards the September bills coming through the House.
Thank you. And we'll take a final question for the meantime, Josh.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I was interested in including the offshore islands, mentioned Mayoral Islands, which I understand doesn't have any development. I was wondering if you're also including Mayoral and knowing that like Mayoral has associated and what's happening. I was just wondering the islands that preserved by permits only was else incorporated in this special.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I think at this point, the inclusion of the offshore islands really is to include the DIA as the administrators of those islands. How that looks or falls in the final spatial plan is yet to be determined, but as a partner or an administrator, and in this sense as they act as the local authority in terms of district planning matters, it was important that they came to the table. So it's really just to demonstrate that they are, and you've seen that they're kind of included off the side. So the process agreement that will come back to you in September should outline more in terms of giving you options for how that looks good.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you staff for being with us here today and your patience to receive that to us. We appreciate it very much. So I do need a movement sector just to receive that. I have removed that second. That's been be drugs now. All those in favour receive the report back to the original spatial plan. Stand by. That's thank you. So that brings us to the conclusion of our event into Mayoral. Once again, we thank all those who have joined us online and also our deputies for us from teams. So to close this off, I'll just do a quick. Kia whakiria te tapu, kia wātea te ara, kia tū ki whakataha ai, kia tū ki whakataha ai, hui e, tai e, te kia, to leave the meeting closed.